The SRAM HS2, are they right for you? I think these rotors have been one of the products that has had the most bang for the buck. Great, easy replacements of existing parts that I've had in a long time. So let's get into it. Before we had the Centerline's SRAM's rotor, and now we have the HS2s. I almost really wanted to get into the new Mavens, but the Mavens, that's a big investment, and putting a whole new braking system on your rig, that's a lot. But just by getting these rotors, I've had incredible performance. And really I did the front rotors first, which is the one you're gonna use the most, and probably the one that is kind of the more tricky one to install. And it was easy, and it went really well, and I'm here to share my experience with you. All right, what's in the box?
What's in the box? What's in the box?
Let's take a look at what's in the box. Now, I like to wear gloves when I handle rotors. I don't want to contaminate them. You could just be really careful and just don't touch the braking surface. But for me, I like to be a little more careful. Now, one thing you really want to make sure, I've gotten a few of these already, make sure that the braking bolts are in here as well, because a lot of times they could fall out easily through the box, or maybe somebody took them. Not saying that people do that, but just throwing that out there. Now, when I take these out, these are the new, or they've been around for a while, but incredible performance. And on the Mavens, they're using these too. So that says a lot about that that SRAM is using these on their new high-end, high-performance brakes. So we got the HS2s versus the older, and people still use these, Centerlines. These are both 200 millimeter rotors, the bigger rotors. There's 220 also. But right away you could start to see some differences. And we're going to talk about why these have so much better performance, so much better heat dispersion, as well as quieter. Everybody loves a quieter brake rotor, even the people around you. Okay, let's talk about how these HS2s are designed to perform better. Right away, one of the biggest things is the thickness. They're the same size rotors, 200s, but when we look closer, you can see the Centerlines are 1.85 and the new HS2s are 2 millimeters thick. So they're thicker. Now, does that mean you get more wear out of them? Not necessarily. It's gonna be 0.3 millimeters on both. And it says on your rotors how much life you get out of them, which is really hard to see with the naked eye. But where you do have longevity is in the thickness of this rotor. They're beefier, they're stiffer. Weight-wise, these are gonna be 206 grams, and these are gonna be 188 grams. So that's about an 18 gram difference. Not a big deal. So in my book, unless you're really into weight, but the performance I think is definitely worth it. That would be the only thing about these that would be different. But if you're gonna have more material, you're also gonna have a little more weight. You also have a little bit of paint on these. You have some paint that goes around the spokes of the HS2s that promote heat dispersion. So heat dispersion is going to be one of the big things. I don't know if you've ever looked at your rotors and you've seen where you've had overheating. That's really common, and I've never noticed that with these HS2s. And I've been running them on my fronts really hard, and I haven't noticed that at all. SRAM's claim for these is that it's 40% better at heat dispersion, 7% better at braking power. So why? Because you got more braking pad surface, and the slants on the HS2 go kind of like in little hatches, while these ones go along with the rotor, so you have less actual places for the pads to grab, if that makes sense. So quieter, definitely. With the Centerlines, a lot of people talked about that SRAM squeak that you get, especially in wet weather. I've never had that with these. These are just amazing in that regard too. So a quieter, better performing, more durable brake. Now let's talk about Are they right for you?
Do you love long descents? Are you a little more aggressive downhill? Do you like more technical riding? Then these rotors are definitely for you. The grab on these is really even and consistent. Like, let's say you're in something technical and you bite, I think it's evened out a little bit. There's less flex in the rotor. So all around, more durable. I think that these rotors are really great for everybody. And one of the things that made me concerned was I was worried about how much they're thicker and am I going to have more brake rub? That's kind of like a problem ongoing as your own mechanic and with bikes. Is that rotor, especially a 200 millimeter rotor, going to have more brake rub? And these are thicker and I haven't had any brake rub. And I've been riding these really hard. Also the install. I was talking to a mechanic at the bike shop and I was like, I don't know. Just that little bit of thickness more. Wow. Is that going to make it harder to install? And it wasn't. So if you look right in here, when I'm trying to install a rotor and then trying to adjust the caliper, sometimes that's really tricky and you get the rub, but these should stay straighter and have less warping. And using the same type of brake pads, you have to use new brake pads, same type of brake pads, same calipers, everything. It went super smooth, which I love. So my front rotors went out first and I replaced those first. And I need to now replace my back rotors. How do you know when it's time to replace your rotors? A good sign is your pads can be really worn, but if you're clamping down and your lever's going really close to your grip, that could be one indicator you're having less power. But a visual inspection is really something you want to do. Now, here's my old center lines off the front. I can notice that they might have gouges all the way around it. They might have heat warping, which you can see on my backs definitely do have. I don't use anything to measure my rotors for time for replacement. But if I can see that there's a big groove that's going around and there's a big difference between the thickness of the rotor and the spokes going around, I can pretty much know it's time. But if we're going to look at them on the bike, these are my old rotors. I'd normally not do that. You also know I don't want to be greasy, so I'm wearing gloves. But when I look at my old rotors, you can definitely see that there's some overheating that happened on these. And that is what's really going to cause warping. You can see some big grooves going down on my back rotors. It's definitely time for these. You can really see that there is a difference between how much wear there is and how much they would have been currently by looking at the rotor. Now, when I look down into my brakes, that's kind of tricky. A lot of times you want to just take your brake pads out. But let's take a look down inside and see if we can see any differences. You can see my pistons are coming out pretty far. That's a sign that, yes, my brake pads are too low and my rotor is also getting worn. I need new brake pads. The corners, they are really worn down. Another one is when you spin the wheel, sometimes you'll sometimes have a warp to them. These aren't that bad as far as warping goes. I've had to do a little bit of that bending the rotor back at times, but they're pretty true as far as rotors go. But if yours are like sticking or waving back and forth and you're having a hard time with that, that would be a good reason why you need to replace your rotors. So I highly recommend that you go from the Centerlines to the HS2s. I pointed out a lot of great benefits. In the installation, we're going to talk about that in the next video. So installing the HS2s and brake pads. You got to get new brake pads. Here's a tough one. You choose your own adventure. Do you want to go organic or metallic pads? You can't switch between the two without switching the rotors. That could be also an issue why you have noisy brakes or a reason to change your rotors. But you have to stick with organic or metallic. I found that I could run organic brake pads even in wet weather with these HS2s, and they've been phenomenal. No issues on power or anything. I'm a bigger guy with a bigger build, and my bike is a bigger build, and I've had no issues with stopping at all or brake performance. I have more than enough brakes. with these HS2 rotors that are really a game changer. So if you want to see how I installed new pads and a new rotor, check out my video in the description. And if you'd like to see more cool stuff that I'm checking out, please subscribe. Ride the kiosk. Yeah.